Nomad Podcast.
So, Ian, thanks for doing this with me.
Yeah, thank you.
My first question for you is, how did you get into Bitcoin?
Sure. So, I grew up in a very rural area, kind of a country boy from the States, and I've always been interested in technology and in different things. And so I was working as a lawyer in Florida, and this was after the financial crash. I was working at a large law firm during the financial crash, and then I went to Florida, and I heard about Bitcoin from some college students and law students. And I thought it was like gaming payments or something. I wasn't sure. And so I was curious, but then it seemed interesting to me. I've always been into like Austrian economics. And so seeing the crash, I had a family at the time. I'm always looking out for them and their future. And so it was interesting to me. So I caught wind of a Bitcoin conference going on in Miami back in 2013. It was called the North American Bitcoin Conference back then. It was very small. I mean, we're here in Lugano in Switzerland today, and there are probably 4 or 5, maybe even 10 times more people at this conference than were at that conference back in 2013, right?
Yeah, so
And I went to learn. I'm learning something new every day, and it was very interesting to me. So as I'm driving home from Miami to the west side of Florida, I remember thinking in the car, I'm not a real estate lawyer. I was a trial attorney at Transact, but one of my real estate partners was complaining about how his client had to move money from Europe to, like, I don't know, Malta or Cyprus or something, and then to the Caribbean, and then to the States, and then to buy a piece of property, and then just to tear something down and build something bigger, And I'm like, wait a second, the light bulb goes on. I'm saying Bitcoin could fix that. Bitcoin could solve that problem. And this was on the drive home, and then I pull over to get gas. And in South Florida, there are quite a few immigrants that pick in the fields peppers and tomatoes, and they work so hard. They're out in the sun all day, every day, and they work hard for just barely any money. But they were sending money back home to their home country. And I remember stopping for gas, and I was waiting in line. The gas station also was a money transmitter, like a Western Union. And my Spanish isn't very good, but I remember ventidos, and he was going to be paying 22% interest to send like $100 back home to Guatemala.
okay.
So his family would get $78. Western Union would get 22. And I'm like, wait a second.
That's not right,
Bitcoin solves this too, right? And so to me, if rich people like it and poor people like it, I knew it was here to stay. I didn't know how, I didn't know exactly, like this was still early, but I knew it was here to stay. So that was when the light bulb went on. I think it probably took me a year to get a wallet still. I mean, it was but I think I got my first Bitcoin like on a gambling website or something, and then I wasted it away, with regret. But that got the interest, and it never went away.
Okay.
And then scroll forward a little bit longer, and I had the privilege of representing a very early Bitcoin developer, Luke Dasher. Luke is like the longest serving Bitcoin core developer, and he had a legal problem. If you've been in the space a long time, people are trying to defraud you, they're trying to kidnap you, they're trying to threaten you, and so I met Luke, and he needed legal advice, and I think I lost count at some point, but I think Craig Wright has sued him like a half a dozen times, and so it was one of those things that he became a client and a friend, and of course, if you hang out with Luke for any period of time, you learn something more about Bitcoin, and I'm still learning every time I talk to him, and so that was the start of that relationship. And then go forward a few more years after that, and we were talking and concerned about centralization, especially in Bitcoin mining pools.
Yeah.
When we launched, I'm a co-founder of Ocean Mining Pool. And Ocean is focused, like laser focused on decentralization, transparency, and permissionlessness. And that allows miners to take back their sovereignty and take back the role of mining. Because when we launched about a year ago, about 95% or so of the world's Bitcoin, the newly minted Bitcoin, the newly mined Bitcoin was going to 3 addresses.
Okay.
Like, if people talk about governments and threats of governments, China or the US or others, and they can't shut down 15,000 nodes around the world, 20,000 nodes, depending on how you count. But they can shut down 3 addresses. 3 large companies were mining all of the world's Bitcoin and taking custody of that. And that wasn't good for Bitcoin. And there are technical solutions to solve that. They've been there from the beginning. And so it's silly to say kind of, we wanted to bring the old ways of Bitcoin back to the future, right? Just 10 years later, right? But we wanted to bring those old ways back. And so our focus from the start was getting miners to mine their own templates, still be able to share the economics of pooled mining, because otherwise you're just lottery mining at that
Yeah,
point. But we wanted them to take back, deciding what goes into the block template, what transactions get processed. That shouldn't be for three people to decide. Because not only were the payouts going to 3 addresses, but like there were only 3 templates, right? And and they decided who goes in, who stays out. It wasn't good, right? And if you scroll that out a bit further, I think there were maybe 6 or 7 more pools that were taking the rest. So like 95 were going to these 3. Another 4% were going to the other large ones, and then like 1% was going to everyone else in the world, right? It just wasn't enough. So since we launched, we've been able to get our miners. We now have about 70 or 80% of our customers mining on Datum, which is our most recent software, written by Jason Hughes, WizKid, and Luke. And to me, that allows the miners to choose their own template, still share the economics of mining, but it basically gets them back to being a solo miner.
Okay.
But they don't have to be a lottery miner. They can still share the economics of the pool.
And don't rely on others, I guess.
Correct. And so they run their own node, they run Datum, they mine with Ocean, and now all of a sudden, instead of doing 3 payouts around the globe, now we've got 70, 80, 100. All of our customers are getting payouts directly from the blockchain, right from the Bitcoin network. And then for our smaller miners that weren't large enough to get those direct payouts because of firmware and hardware limitations, we've been able to set up a nice instance of Bolt 12 Lightning. And in a non-custodial way, allow them to sign and prove that it's their Bitcoin address. And once they verify that, then we can arrange for the Lightning payouts to go to them directly.
Okay.
So it allows more and more access to the Bitcoin network with fewer and fewer middlemen. The Bitcoin is supposed to be peer-to-peer financial transactions.
Not like a triangle.
Correct. And mining is an important part of that. That's how the transactions get mined. But why set up middleman after middleman, layer after layer? And of course, they were charging hidden fees, exorbitant fees. There's a cost of that money, right? So if I'm a pool and I'm giving a miner using an FPPS model, fixed pay per share, if I'm giving them a price, I set the price, the pool sets the price. And not only that, but then what they're doing is they're charging for the cost of that money, whether they find a block or not, right? There's a randomness to the proof of work, right? So whether they find blocks or not, they're paying their customers. But in order to afford to do that, they have to cover their backsides, right? So they're covering themselves by charging, somewhere between 9, 10, and even 15% for the cost of the money. That's very expensive. And mining, Bitcoin mining, is a very tough business. Low margins, high cost of energy, high cost of capital with machines. It's a tough business. And so if you're saying, to these large custodial pools that they're taking, 10% of their revenue and just keeping it and putting it in their pocket. And we said, no. You got to get that revenue back into the hands of the miners. They're the ones doing the proof of work. And so by getting out of the middle, we're able to get those costs down and those, and so we're seeing, with, as a small pool, there's still variance, but we pay, using our Tide system when we hit blocks. And so when we hit blocks, our miners are getting more revenue. Now, they sacrifice that short-term cash flow because we're not financing it, right?
Yep.
But they're getting more revenue over time with Ocean than with other pools. And now, as we start to grow, we're getting to the point where we'll start seeing daily payouts anyway, right? Just because we're hitting more blocks as we grow. And so now it solves the cash flow problem, it solves the revenue problem, and it makes miners more sovereign again. So it's decentralization, it's fully transparent, and the other nice thing is it's truly permissionless. So you don't need to set up an account. You just point your Bitcoin address, your miner's address, to our pool, and you get the Bitcoin. It's really, I don't want to call it magic, it's just good tech, right? It's solid tech, but
it's simple tech as well.
That's right. So getting back to those old ways of doing it. And so for us, that's so important. And then we've also been able to, as we've been listening to miners, as we've been listening to customers, we've been able to see, what their pain points are and other things. So we've got some other things in the hopper. We're doing some pilot programs where we can start setting up like a share market, a hash rate market, where they do the work, proof of work, but then they can sell their shares, and liquidity providers, instead of being a pool, like a monopoly of one or two liquidity providers. Now we can open that market up so it's truly a free market. So anyone then can be a liquidity provider and buy shares. So then they can buy the Bitcoins. That helps the miners with short-term revenue, but it also allows liquidity providers to access the network in ways and get Bitcoin that they wouldn't have been able to get before.
Mm.
So that's a pilot program. It's working. We're running that out of our El Salvador office. We stood up an office there. But we expect good adoption for that, and we should be able to roll it out in a public way, in a more robust way soon. So
Okay,
we're
cool.
excited.
Um, Actually, well, that was a lot of information. My question now for you is: do you think then, mining-wise, that especially in the US currently with Trump, Kamala, and Trump saying I'm pro Bitcoin, she's actually I mean suddenly she's like pro Bitcoin as well in crypto, but it's not.
Well, it's hard. They tell you not to talk about politics and religion, but I like to talk about both.
Yeah, yeah.
I like the controversy, but it's interesting. So, I don't judge a politician by what they say.
Hmm.
If I were to bet, I would say they're all liars, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so I don't trust what they say. I instead judge them by their fruit. What do they do, right? And so during the Trump administration previously, they left Bitcoin mining relatively alone, right? Now, there were still some big government, the SEC and the IRS and the commodities regulators, CFTC and others that were all trying to get their piece, right? And that's the bureaucracy as it grows in big government. So I'm a proponent of limited government in limiting their approach and their authority. But you still have to navigate those waters. But certainly the most recent administration, the Biden administration, has been actively hostile to Bitcoin,
Yeah.
actively hostile to Bitcoin mining. And so to me, it's a no-brainer. My hope is that Trump wins. And my hope is that he'll just leave us alone a bit. But the real question will be, and I think Stella Assange said this. It's not so much who wins at the top of the ticket. It's who do they surround themselves with once they get into office, right? So my hope is that Trump wins, who at least appears to be more open and more economically friendly to Bitcoin or innovation. But then at the same time, who does he surround himself with? So some of these aggressive agencies that are just bureaucrats, they're unelected officials. They have no real authority except what they try to take. But the courts have been pushing back a bit in the U.S. They've been curbing the government authority with some Supreme Court decisions and other things. So I think over time the trend is hopeful, and I like to maintain some hope that not only will the trend continue to starve that leviathan, that evil bureaucracy, that kind of mindless bureaucracy, right? I hope that it gets starved a little bit of its authority and power, but also that there will maybe be some positive things, like some proactive things from Congress or other legislators to say, all right, let's carve out some sandboxes, some safe havens for people to continue to experiment and innovate in the space. So.
Cool. So you think then that maybe under Trump there will be much more easier ways to mine Bitcoin, in a sense, or it would be easier for minor companies to mine?
Yeah, I hope so. That's my hope. I think like you come here to Switzerland and they know what Bitcoin is. Like they define it, their rules, their regulations, they understand it, right? In the United States, if you were to ask 10 different regulators, you'd get 12 different answers, right?
Yeah.
Is it a security? Is it a commodity? Is it money? Is it this? Is it that? So just having some clearer guidelines and rules, I think that's a hope of a new administration. The current administration, regretfully, likes the ambiguity. They like it to not be defined because then they can enforce and they can threaten people, and they use the Justice Department to threaten folks and prosecute people. And that makes especially large public miners in the U.S. very cautious, very risk adverse. And there are some wild horses out there that are trying to stand up smaller or mid-sized mining operations, but even those are capital intensive. So if you give them some guidance and some rules, I think they'll navigate smoothly, and I think that'll give them an opportunity to continue to grow and innovate so that they don't have to leave. But we talk to customers all around the world, here in Europe, in Paraguay, and El Salvador, and other places, and at some point, Bitcoin mining is about low-cost energy, effective energy, and the ability to deploy the logistics of deploying machines and keeping them running, right? So our pool can help make sure you get the most if you mine, but those challenges don't go away with a different administration. You still need good energy, need cheap energy. So I hope that some energy reform also comes back to the U.S. More nuclear. And let's not be scared of oil and gas. We don't have to go back to the Stone Age yet.
Exactly.
We can continue to grow. I mean, if you look at prosperity in human history throughout the world, it's always tied to energy in many ways. And so why intentionally put up obstacles and set yourself back? So there's a bit of a log jam in the U.S. Around energy policy. I grew up near a river in kind of the woods, an old logging town. And when too many logs get put in the river at the same time, it causes a log jam. The river
Yeah.
won't flow. And so every once in a while, you have to take a stick of dynamite and throw it on the log jam, and it busts it up, and then the river flows again, and the logs wash down, and then you can And so I'm hoping that with U.S. energy policy, we just toss a little stick of
Okay.
dynamite in there and free up that log jam again once and for all.
Wow. Do they actually do that, or is that
They
just?
used to do that, yeah.
Oh,
So
okay.
so like 1800s, late 1800s, early 1900s, they would cut down the logs, put as many in the river as they could. But if they went too fast, then
Yeah, yeah, of course.
the river would stop flowing, right? So if it jams, the one guy, like he creeps out there, hope he has a good arm to get it out there and blow up the log jam, and off it goes. Maybe
Okay.
lose a finger along the way,
Okay,
So,
okay. Now my final question for you is, where can people find you, social media wise, and also the company?
Sure. So the company is at ocean.xyz. Very simple to find, very easy user interface. You can start mining with us in 30 seconds, a minute. And if you've got a whole fleet, it takes a little longer, but not much longer. It's very simple. Just point the Bitcoin address in there, ocean.xyz.
Okay.
And then personally, if you need to reach out, I'm at legal@ocean.xyz. That's my email. And I'm on social media as Ocean Lawyer on X. On LinkedIn, I'm a Bitcoin lawyer, or just my name, Ian Northon. It's very simple. And I'm on the other things like Telegram, Bitcoin lawyer. I'm there. I'm around. I'm not hiding. I'm pretty easy to find.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Nomad Podcast.